HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Finally Focused, the breakthrough natural treatment plan for ADHD that restores attention, minimizes hyperactivity, and helps eliminate drug side effects, by James Greenblatt, MD, and Bill Gottlieb, CHC. Read by Stephen R. Thorne. Before you begin, the plus-minus treatment plan, why it works, and how to make it work for your child or for you. You have changed the lives of my child and my family. That passage is from an email sent to me at the end of a school year by Cynthia D., the mother of 10-year-old Michael, a patient of mine who has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. Their names have been changed for confidentiality, as have the names of the patients and parents featured throughout the book. Here's more from her inspiring message. Michael is doing very well, she wrote. In fact, as long as we follow your recommendations, he is a different child. Before he started treatment, he ended third grade at the 10th percentile in both math and reading, and I was told his executive function, his ability to plan, organize, and complete tasks, was at the 1 percentile level. In other words, his executive functioning couldn't have been worse. At the year-end meeting with his third-grade teachers, a year in which he'd had 18 write-ups for bad behavior, they more or less told us that Michael was academically doomed. But with the supplements and dietary changes you recommended, particularly avoiding dairy products, he's now at 70% in math and reading, and his executive function is 100%. At the year-end meeting with his fourth-grade teachers, a year in which he had just 1 write-up for behavior problems, they told us Michael is an above-average student, a sweet, funny, smart child who is a pleasure to work with. Once again, Cynthia concluded, thank you for all your work. Hearing a story like Michael's is commonplace for me, where a dietary factor that is triggering the symptoms of ADHD is detected and removed. A nutritional supplement helps repair imbalances in the brain caused by a nutritional deficiency, and a child suffering from the symptoms of ADHD is freed to be the sweet, funny, smart child he truly is. This happens so often, I feel completely confident that the happy ending of Michael's story, symptoms controlled, life lived to its full potential, could happen to your child or adolescent with ADHD, or it could happen to you if you're an adult with ADHD. I've gained my confidence from 3 decades as a child psychiatrist and an integrative psychiatrist, treating thousands of children and adolescents with ADHD. During those 30 years, I've learned this essential fact about the disorder. ADHD is not a behavior problem or a discipline problem. ADHD is a medical disorder in which genetic, neurological, nutritional, and environmental factors imbalance the brain, causing imbalanced behavior. As an integrative psychiatrist, I don't limit myself to prescribing medications to control the symptoms of ADHD. I look for and detect the underlying causes of the disorder, and I address those causes using natural treatments first and medications only when necessary. And even if I do prescribe an ADHD drug, I do so in conjunction with powerful natural treatments that give patients with ADHD relief from medication side effects. And as an integrative psychiatrist, I don't take a one-size-fits-all approach to treatment because it doesn't work. Every person with ADHD, child, adolescent, or adult, has a unique pattern of deficiencies and excesses that imbalance the brain. Correcting these deficiencies and excesses, adding what is needed and subtracting what isn't, is what my plus-minus plan is all about. For Michael, the protein in dairy, casein, was a symptom-triggering excess, and we took it out of his diet, a minus you'll read more about in Chapter 6. Like nearly all kids with ADHD, Michael also had a magnesium deficiency, and we added a nutritional supplement to correct it, a plus you'll read about in Chapter 1. Having successfully treated thousands of people with ADHD using this plus-minus approach, I'm still frustrated that there are millions of people with diagnosed ADHD who are searching for answers. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 11% of children ages 4 to 17 have been diagnosed with ADHD, more than 6 million kids. Another 8 million adults have the disorder, with only about 1 in 5 treated. I wrote this book because I wanted to bring relief to as many of those millions as possible, to your child or adolescent with ADHD, to you if you're an adult with ADHD. But first, I'd like you to know a little bit about the newest scientific understanding of the underlying causes of the symptoms of ADHD, and why the plus-minus plan addresses them. And because this book is a powerful tool to effectively control symptoms, I'd like you to know exactly how to use it before you begin. One disorder, many names. The most important point about ADHD, it is not a disease. It's a disorder or syndrome, which are both ways to label a collection of symptoms. In ADHD, the symptoms are behavioral and can cause problems at home, at school, or at work, with a spouse, with a family member, or with a friend. But these problematic symptoms are usually just one side of a very lively personality. Kids and adults with ADHD are energetic, creative, intuitive, and passionate about what interests them, with great strengths and talents. Well-known people diagnosed with the disorder include billionaire Richard Branson, Pulitzer Prize-winning author Catherine Ellison, comedian Jim Carrey, and 6-time Tony Award winner Audra McDonald. But just as water can hurt you if you drink too much of it, an excess of the characteristics of ADHD, the high energy, the dreamy creativity, the need for new experiences, the willingness to take risks, can hurt personal development, relationships, and productivity. The disorder has the following 3 main symptoms, as a parent or teacher might describe them. I'm sure you're familiar with one or more of them if you have a child or adolescent with ADHD, or if you're an ADHD adult. Inattention. She doesn't listen, even when spoken to directly. He has a tough time sticking with or completing a task, whether it's homework or a game. She's disorganized and messy. He loses things constantly. She's forgetful. He doesn't pay attention to details and makes a lot of seemingly careless mistakes. She doesn't like to do things that require focus. He's easily distracted. Hyperactivity. She fidgets and squirms constantly. He's always on the go. She can't stay in her seat at school or at the dinner table. He runs around or climbs when it's inappropriate, like at the mall. She talks all the time. He can't play quietly. Impulsivity. She blurts out an answer before you finish the question. He can't wait his turn. She interrupts or otherwise intrudes when you're trying to talk to your spouse. He's irritable, angry, or aggressive. She can't delay short-term pleasure for long-term results. But those symptoms aren't anything new. Doctors have been identifying and labeling those types of symptoms for more than a century, often pejoratively. In 1902, the symptoms were branded defective moral control. In other words, the child with these symptoms was a bad human being, a perspective that's still all too common today. In the 1920s, the symptoms were dubbed the restlessness syndrome. In the 1930s, after a worldwide epidemic of encephalitis, an infection of the brain, scientists called it post-encephalitic behavior disorder. In the 1940s, the favored term was brain-injured child. In the 1950s, that term was changed to minimal brain damage. In the 1960s, with many scientists challenging the concept that brain damage was present in every child with the symptoms, the commonly used term became minimal brain dysfunction. In 1968, the nomenclature for the disorder became more formalized after it was included for the first time in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the standard classification of mental disorders used by mental health professionals in the United States. The name? Hyperkinetic reaction of childhood. In 1980, inattention was formally recognized as part of the disorder, with its name in the DSM changing to attention deficit disorder, with subtypes that included ADD with hyperactivity, ADD without hyperactivity, and ADD residual type. In 1987, the DSM labeled the syndrome Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD, without subtypes. In 2000, the DSM listed 3 types of ADHD: ADHD combined type, both inattention and hyperactivity, ADHD predominantly inattentive type, and ADHD predominantly hyperactive type. In 2013, the newest edition of the DSM kept the same names, a surprising development given this century-long history of constant renaming. Why so many names? The answer is simple. Scientists and clinicians didn't understand the factors underlying the symptoms. They were caused by defective morals. No, they were caused by a viral infection. No, they were caused by brain damage. This century-long lineup of misunderstandings led to a century-long lineup of wrong-minded names. But in the mid-90s, the causes of ADHD became the focus of serious scientific research, with more than 10,000 scientific papers on ADHD generated in the last 2 decades. And that new research has firmly established ADHD as a genetic, neurological, nutritional, and environmental disorder in which an imbalanced brain triggers imbalanced behavior. Let's take a closer look at the factors scientists now understand are the root causes of ADHD. After we do that, we'll examine how the plus-minus plan helps control those factors. One disorder, many causes. There is no single cause of ADHD. Rather, multiple factors can trigger ADHD symptoms. In some people, it's one factor. In others, it's many. Here are the most fundamental causes. Genetic. The fact that ADHD has a genetic component is obvious to many parents of ADHD children, because 50% of parents with an ADHD child have the disorder too. Scientists certainly haven't missed the heritable nature of the disorder, and they now estimate that 75% of those diagnosed with ADHD have genetic drivers. In other words, 3 out of 4 people with ADHD have different genes than non-ADHD people. The main genes affected are those that control neurotransmitters, chemicals that relay messages from neuron to neuron. Specifically, the genes that control dopamine and norepinephrine, neurotransmitters that regulate attention or the ability to focus and supply a person's pleasurable sense of reward. When dopamine is plentiful, you're focused and you feel good, a feeling most of us try to repeat in many different ways, from a lifetime of rewarding work to the briefer rewards that come from food and sex. Because of their genes, people with ADHD have far fewer receptors for dopamine, and the fewer receptors, the greater the symptoms of inattention, according to a study from researchers at the National Institute of Drug Abuse. It's no surprise, then, that most medications for ADHD work by boosting dopamine levels in the brain. Compared with the rest of us, people with ADHD have sluggish and underfed brain reward circuits, so much of everyday life feels routine and understimulating, wrote Richard Friedman, M.D., a professor of clinical psychiatry at the Weill Cornell Medical College in New York. To compensate, they are drawn to new and exciting experiences and get famously impatient and restless with the regimented structure that characterizes our modern world. Neurological. People with ADHD not only have different genes than non-ADHD people, they have different brains, too, different developing brains. Kids with ADHD have areas of their brains that are, on average, smaller than the same areas in non-ADHD kids. These areas control attention, impulsivity, and executive function, or the ability to plan, organize, focus, and complete a task. The ADHD brain isn't permanently smaller. It lags about 2 to 3 years behind normal development and eventually catches up. That's one reason why ADHD symptoms tend to decrease or disappear in adolescence. Those same areas of the brain are also less active metabolically. When compared to the brains of non-ADHD kids, ADHD brains receive less oxygen-rich blood flow and are less able to utilize blood sugar for fuel. The very brain cells of an ADHD kid have a tougher time getting what they need for optimal functioning. The brain of an ADHD kid is smaller. It gets less oxygen and blood sugar. And there's one more big difference. The ADHD brain has a different set of brain waves. It's easy to think of the brain as a spongy chunk of matter, but the brain is more like a big bulb with a mysterious, multidimensional light show inside, a pulsing parade of electrical waves, alpha, beta, delta, theta, that send communications from one mass of neurons to another, unifying the regions of the brain to produce experience. In fact, brainwaves are so central to experience that it's not an exaggeration to say they are the very definition of what it is to be alive. When there are no more brainwaves, a person is declared legally dead. Two types of brainwaves are different in 80% to 90% of ADHD kids. Children with ADHD have more theta, the high waves that slowly move through the brain when you're dreamy, tired, or sluggish. And kids with ADHD have less beta, the low waves that speedily buzz through the brain when you're focused, alert, and energized. Scientific findings like these reinforce the fact that ADHD is not a behavior or discipline problem, but a genetically driven neurological condition. To me, this new scientific understanding sends a hopeful message to people with ADHD, overturning the belief that ADHD is a character defect of some kind, a sign of a bad child or a bad parent. Environmental. When we're talking about the environment, we're usually talking about nature and pollution. But when medical experts use the word environment, they're using a technical term to designate causes of disease outside the body and the mind. For example, it's no accident ADHD is more prevalent among kids who live in cities. A study shows that a mother's exposure to air pollution during pregnancy raises the risk of having a child with ADHD. Poorer kids are twice as likely to have ADHD. And as I was writing this chapter, a new study was published in the Journal of Environmental Research which showed that kids with higher urinary levels of the toxin BPA, a hormone-like molecule in plastic, were more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. There are many ways to imbalance the brain, and a toxic environment is one of them. Environment also means home and school. For example, a kid who is hyperactive in a classroom of 35 with one teacher might behave normally in a special education classroom of 12 with 2 teachers because his unique energy and drive isn't being shackled to a desk. In a recent study on hyperactivity, researchers analyzed data from 63 studies on ADHD and found kids and adults were most hyperactive when they were faced with challenging environmental factors. Nutritional. Of all the underlying causes of ADHD, this is the one that is most overlooked by conventional doctors. But I've found that correcting nutritional imbalances can make all the difference in ADHD, dramatically changing behavior for the better. Many of the chapters in Finally Focused are about nutrition. For example, you'll learn that 9 out of 10 ADHD children have a deficiency of the nerve-nourishing mineral magnesium, worsening focus, irritability, anxiety, sleep problems, and a range of other ADHD symptoms. You'll discover how taking pigment-rich plant extracts can balance brainwaves, how omega-3 fatty acids can reinforce the structure of brain cells, and how removing a protein in dairy from the diet can sometimes make all the difference. Bottom line, a well-nourished brain is a well-balanced brain. One series of landmark studies, conducted over 40 years by Janina Galler, MD, a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, dramatically illustrates the link between poor nutrition and the symptoms of ADHD. Dr. Galler studied children from Barbados who were hospitalized at least one time during their infancy for moderate to severe malnutrition. But she didn't just study them as infants. She tracked their health and well-being for the next 40 years, with measurements taken at the ages of 5 to 11, 11 to 17, and 37 to 43. Compared to similar nourished children, the malnourished children had lower IQs. 50% had IQ scores below 90, compared to 17% of the nourished children. Shorter attention spans, more distractibility, more restlessness, and poorer memory. 60% of the malnourished children had those symptoms, compared to 15% of the nourished. Poorer performance at school, in reading, mathematics, science, arts and crafts, and many other subjects. Poorer behavior, with lower scores on tests that measured social skills, like having friends and getting along with family members. More aggression. Poorer executive functioning, with less ability to plan, organize, and complete tasks. More temper tantrums and crying as children. Most of these problems persisted into adolescence, and then continued into adulthood, 40 years after the kids were born. I don't think anyone should have to suffer the same fate, especially since there are so many simple ways to fix ADHD-causing nutritional deficiencies. The misery of untreated ADHD. Michael's story had a happy ending. But when ADHD goes untreated, there are millions of unhappy endings for kids, adolescents, and adults. Untreated, children with ADHD tend to do poorly in school, with nearly 50% of ADHD kids being suspended at some point. They have more problems with their family and fewer friends. They're relentlessly criticized for their behavior, and their self-esteem plummets. Untreated, adolescents with ADHD tend to engage in risky behavior. Compared to their peers without ADHD, they're more likely to smoke, use illegal drugs, drive recklessly, and get into accidents, and have sex earlier. 30% drop out of high school compared to 10% of non-ADHD kids. Untreated adults with ADHD can be inattentive and distractible and find it hard to get organized and on track. They often do poorly at work. They're twice as likely to get separated or divorced from their spouses. They experience more anxiety and depression, and they're more likely to be addicted to tobacco or illegal drugs. If you're a parent with an ADHD child or adolescent or an adult with ADHD, effective treatment is literally at hand in Finally Focused and its plus-minus plan. How to use this book. I've written Finally Focused like a book-length prescription that provides all the background information and practical guidelines you need to confidently treat your ADHD child or yourself. This book and your efforts will be enough to effectively relieve the symptoms of ADHD. Think of Finally Focused as a manual for the ADHD brain, teaching you how to balance it, thereby controlling imbalanced, counterproductive behaviors of all kinds. I know that for a manual to really work in your overwhelming world, the instructions have to be easy, quick, and effective. Nothing I suggest will be that hard to do or take a long time. I'll walk you through a hierarchy of things to try that have been time-tested with thousands of my patients. Part 1 is composed of the 11 elements of the plus-minus plan itself. All of the 11 treatments in my plus-minus plan are simple and well documented. There's nothing included in the plus-minus plan that has failed to prove its effectiveness over 3 decades of treating children with ADHD. Part 2 includes my own unique guidance about medication and behavior therapy, the 2 main conventional treatments for ADHD. Here are the most important points about using the plan. You're in charge. I've used words like prescriptions and instructions and guidelines to describe my advice, but the most accurate word is suggestions. I'm describing in every necessary detail what to do, but I'm not telling you what to do. You have to decide for yourself what to do. True change and healing typically occur when the whole person is involved: intellect, feeling, and intention. You have to think and feel that the recommendations in the plus-minus plan are right for your child or you, and then carry them out. Of course, I've been using these treatments to help children and parents for nearly 30 years, so I hope you find them as compelling as I do. You can partner with a health professional. You can safely and effectively implement the treatments in the plus-minus plan on your own. This is a book for parents and ADHD adults who want to take charge of the symptoms of ADHD. But it can be very helpful to work with one or more health professionals when managing ADHD. And that includes your doctor, a must, of course, if medication is involved. As you'll see, each chapter provides plenty of scientific support for the treatments in the plus-minus plan. If you or your doctor want to read more of any of the studies I've summarized, please see the notes at the back of the book for study citations. You can find those same citations on my website, www.finallyfocusedbook.com. The chapters are stepping stones, so follow them one by one. The elements of the plus-minus plan appear in the exact order in which they're most effectively applied. The first plus-minus treatment to apply is in Chapter 1. The 11th treatment to apply is in Chapter 11. For the fastest, most reliable results, I recommend you start with Chapter 1 and work your way through the book, chapter by chapter, monitoring each step's effectiveness with your child or yourself. For some cases of ADHD, you might only have to implement the recommendations in Chapters 1, 2, and 3 for complete control of symptoms. In others, you might need many elements of the plan. All my patients first get a prescription for magnesium, a nerve-nourishing mineral supplement. Magnesium deficiency afflicts 90% of all people with ADHD and triggers symptoms like restlessness, poor focus, irritability, sleep problems, and anxiety. These symptoms can lessen or vanish 1 month after supplementation starts. Magnesium can also prevent or reverse ADHD drug side effects. I tell the whole story in Chapter 1. It's a simple action with maximum impact. That's why it's the first step in the plus-minus plan. I want you to see results fast. A supplement that delivers extracts of OPCs, oligomeric proanthocyanidins, powerful plant pigments like the blue in blueberries and the green in green tea, is in the same curative category, balancing brain waves and restoring attention. I discuss this in Chapter 2. The third step, Chapter 3, is another supplement that usually produces an excellent outcome: low-dose nutritional lithium, a mineral commonly found in water and soil. This is not high-dose prescription lithium carbonate, the drug for bipolar disorder. Nutritional lithium is the closest thing there is to a brain tonic, and many people with ADHD are deficient in it, particularly people whose symptoms include irritability, anger, and aggression. The next steps are correcting biochemical imbalances that have a big effect on the brain. Copper-zinc imbalance is discussed in Chapter 4. An excess of HPA, a byproduct of gut metabolism, in Chapter 5, and food sensitivity and food allergy, which often imbalance the vulnerable brains of children 10 and younger, in Chapter 6. Discovering if your child or you have these imbalances may take a little bit of detective work, but each has an easy and safe treatment to use even if you're not 100% sure the imbalance is in play. Chapters 7 through 11 deliver other key features of the plus-minus plan. Chapter 7 features omega-3 fatty acids, which strengthen the outer layer, membrane, of brain cells, the site of intra-brain communication. Chapter 8 presents the importance of regularly eating protein to nourish the brain. In fact, just adding protein to a sugary snack or meal can neutralize the impact of sugar. Chapter 9 reveals a unique formula of amino acids and B vitamins that can duplicate the results of ADHD drugs, perhaps obviating the need for a stimulant medication. Chapter 10 is a practical address to solving sleep problems, common in ADHD, and also advocates regular exercise. Chapter 11 explores the many benefits of mindfulness for ADHD kids and their parents and for ADHD adults. Although I recommend working your way through the book beginning with Chapter 1, of course you can start with any chapter.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?